welcome to the Religion Bites podcast. I'm Malory Nye, and this is episode 20. This episode will be looking at the topic of race and religion, returning to an issue that I introduced initially back in episode 12. In particular, today I'll be making an initial exploration of a question I aim to pursue further in a lot of depth. That is, when we speak of religion, are we in fact talking about race? Before I get started though, here's just a quick reminder that I also run another podcast series titled Histories Inc., after the quote from Mark Twain, that the ink with which history is written is merely fluid prejudice. The Histories Inc. podcast is an exploration of various themes of history, and in particular how such explorations say something significant and important in the present. I've been exploring various themes within this podcast, including encounter and colonialism, religion and Reformation, slavery, Islam, and Scotland. If you think that sounds interesting, then the episode can be found on the website, which is histories, with a YS, histories-inc.com. And a big shout out also, I'm recording this, along with previously other episodes, in the recording studio of the School of Critical Studies at the University of Glasgow. So, a big thanks to the school and to the University of Glasgow for making these facilities available to me. So, to get started on this episode's topic, I'll begin with a short, sad story. When a young Sikh man called Deep Ray was attacked and shot outside his home near Seattle in Washington on Saturday the 4th of March 2017, the obvious conclusion to draw was this was a mistake. Like a number of similar attacks, including a gunman shooting and killing 6 people at a Sikh Gurdwara near Milwaukee, Wisconsin in August 2012, the attackers had directed their Islamophobic hate crimes at people who were not, in fact, their intended victims. The violence was directed against Sikhs on the presumption that they were somehow Muslim. How can we understand such a significant mistake? Some would say it was just plain ignorance. However, I don't believe any apologies have been made for the mistake of attacking Sikhs rather than Muslims. But I believe there's something else going on here. The basis for these attacks on Sikhs, as presumed Muslims, is not only a seemingly ever-growing sense of threat to exclusivist white nationalist, quotes, American values from Islam and Muslims, the basis is also an identification of the Sikh victims of such attacks in terms of external markers such as skin colouring and clothing. To the attackers, the victims are dark-skinned, quotes, ragheads, identified as being from a different country, even if they were in fact born in the US. That is, in such acts of terrorism, in this case white nationalist terrorism, the intention has been to target victims not only for their religious identities as presumed Muslims, it has also been very largely racial, based on presumptions of race that appear more accurate than the presumptions of religion. Most Sikhs, and indeed the victims of these particular crimes in Washington and Wisconsin, share much in common culturally and racially with many American Muslims. That is, most American Sikhs and many American Muslims come from South Asia, in particular from the area of Punjab, in the northwest of India and the east of Pakistan. They share a common language, and much of what we would call culture, and they have the ethnic markers of clothing and skin colour that are used for designation of race-based differences. In short, the attacks, and indeed the wider issues of Islamophobia, are constructed on overlapping understandings of both religious and racial differences. In this case, as in much else, the racial and the religious overlap is very significant. The violent outpourings of Islamophobia are not about either race or religion, that is, Indian or Muslim. They are about both together. An Indian in this case is by definition a Muslim, even if they aren't. The victim's perceived religion is defined by their perceived race. And so this leads me in to my main issue of discussion, trying to theorize, trying to say something useful about the distinctions or otherwise between race and religion. And my theoretical starting point here is one basic question. And this is the question: when we speak of religion, are we in fact talking about race? I'll repeat that. When we speak of religion, are we in fact talking about race? I'll put that a little bit more carefully. That's quite a clumsy or generalistic way of putting it. So to put it more carefully, what I'm trying to explore is the extent to which discourses on religion and religions, that is, religious practices, religious differences, classifications of people by religion and so on, are means of expressing discourses on race and racial differences. Or does the idea of religion only make sense if we consider it as a particular instance of a racial formation? Now here I work from the assumption that categories of race and gender are fundamental to the analysis of culture and society, inasmuch as both categories, together with other categories such as sexualities, ability, religion, and so on, are part of the constructions of reality in which people live. So to be clear, when I talk about both race and religion, I'm taking both of these as cultural terms. We can call them imagined or constructed or ideological perhaps. They are not intended to refer to any entities that are sui generis, that we could say have a reality beyond the ways in which the terms are put to use. They are part of the social, cultural way we talk about the world. The way I try to put this is to point out that religion isn't a thing in itself. So when we say, this is my religion, it's mine, it's a thing, that is their religion, that thing over there. Rather, it, here in quotes, it is not an it after all. If it is anything, religion is something that is done. To put this a little bit more technically, race, gender, and religion are all practiced ideologies that are embodied discourses, in the terms of Foucault, who we met in an earlier episode. Or otherwise we can call them what the scholar Althusser, who I'll discuss at a later time, what he calls interpellations. These discourses or interpellations operate within fields of power, both from the top down and also from the base or the grassroots upwards, and they are the basis of the embodied realities within which people live. So in other words, we can talk about the idea of race, the idea of religion, the idea of gender. We've got that in its head. We can talk about it ad infinitum. But we also live within these ideas. We embody these ideas. These ideas give shape to our body. They point to various things, the colour of our skin, our anatomies, and so on, and say, therefore you are this race or that gender, and so on and so forth. And it is these bodies that are shot, these bodies that are injured, these bodies that live out, they pull the trigger, they get imprisoned, they die, and so on, through the discourses, the ideas that we have. So going back to this figure Althusser, using his terminology, both religion and race are seemingly obvious realities that are so obvious that their existence is taken for granted. They are obvious because they're obvious. This is the sort of terminology he uses. We know what religion and race are when we see them. This is what he refers to. His phrase is the obviousness of obviousness. It seems strange, but underlying that we just take it for granted so much, it has a reality in itself. And what the anthropologist Clifford Geertz spoke rather differently, but when he talked about culture and religion being part of that culture, religion as making powerful, pervasive and long-lasting moods in people by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence and clothing those conceptions with such an idea of factuality, of truth, that the moods and motivations seem uniquely real. Now we step back from saying they are real, whether race is real or particular religion is real. But for the people who are living within that cultural framework, they seem uniquely real. Another way of putting this is to say both race and religion are cultural discourses. The terms talk about social and cultural realities that exist, and in being such cultural realities, they are used in many ways to construct social and political relations and practices. But neither race nor religion have any basis in any reality beyond the cultural. that is, within specific contexts of language, history, and place, particularly not in the sense that each of these terms themselves imply. In the same way that we assume the reality of money as a thing that exists within itself, even though we know that in reality there are no Gringotts-type vaults underneath banks in which our money is kept in corporal form as pennies or pounds or sovereigns or whatever. There is no reality to our money. But we still spend the money, we count the money, we think of the money, we pay that money. All of this is based on a reality that is very real in terms of monetary value, but is not real in terms of what it says it's about. We've also come to know that there is no actual basis, similarly, for the idea of race, beyond the markers and ideas of difference that have been chosen to determine such racial categories. Race is not a biological state. It is a form of personal, social, and political classification that structures how people think and act. Various things have been taken to identify what we think of race and make such racial identities, such racial differences, very real in the world. Indeed, as a form of classification, it's one of the most primary categories for organizing and governing differences between people. Together with gender, race is a key way to think about, organize, and govern people and resources. It is an imaginary that has a stark and very harsh reality. Thus, race and racial classifications are actual experiences, such as racial discrimination, racism, and race-based violence, such as genocides, slavery, lynchings, police shootings, and mass incarcerations. These all exist in a very real sense, based on this idea, this construction, this discourse of race. And I would say in a similar manner, the term religion is also a way of talking and thinking and practicing about human activities rooted in culture and language. It is a theoretical debate about whether and what exists within and beyond such culture and language. Going beyond the human, but the cultural study of religion explores what humans do with this term religion, not that thing that it's talking about beyond the human. And as a part of this analysis, we also need to recognize that the English language terms and discourses of both race and religion have particular histories that have developed certain meanings to how to think about, organize, and exert power between social and political groups. My central question here is not so much whether these terms are connected, race and religion, whether there is a connection, but to what extent, and if we can at all distinguish religion from race, or vice versa. Largely because of these initial suppositions, both of these terms are very meaningful to a large number of people, albeit in somewhat different ways. Both create and contain very significant emotional investments. People tend to consciously engage with both categories with great passion. Religion is loathed or loved. It's seen as the source of hope and peace, or the source of division, war, and death. Race is everywhere and nowhere, inasmuch as colour blindness or post-racialism is a possibility. The corollary of race is racism. This in itself is a state of mind or accusation that very few people wish to claim, but which is experienced in brutal ways. However, there are some seemingly obvious starting points for looking for the differences between what we think of as race and religion. So that's all for today. As I said, this is something I'm developing. There will be more discussion of this in later podcasts, and some of the issues that are at the basis of this I will also explore in more detail. But for today, thanks very much for listening. Now, I've thrown out a number of authors and a number of ideas. For more details of this, and indeed for a written transcription of this, see the Religion Bites website at the URL religionbites, that's one word, .xyz, religionbites.xyz. And there you can also find not only, as I said, notes for this and the other podcasts within this series, but also details of that other podcast series I run, Histories Inc. You can also subscribe to this podcast on either iTunes or Stitcher, and if you've got any comments or questions and so on, do get in touch with me on Twitter, by email, or through the website and so on. Otherwise, thanks for listening. I'll see you again in the next episode soon. Bye for now.